Warner.
I did. Yes, I did. I called you, but you didn't answer.
Okay, I'm here.
Okay. All right. So Mohammed Athi, David Estorovsky. Okay, here comes Monica. Okay, Monica, you're with us. Give it a second. Emmanuel Plamakis, Taryn Sander, Monica. Monica. All right.
Here.
Okay. All right. So today we're going to cover perception.
Hi, Professor. Can you check my names?
Ruan. Okay,
Yeah.
you are. Gotcha.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So let me just.
Hello, Professor. I'm here.
Yes, this is Monica. Okay. All right. So what do I do with the? Oh, here we are, participants. Strange. I don't know. It's going to take some time to figure this out. I'm not going to waste any more time on this. So in any case, today we're going to discuss perception and, I should mention your discussion board on Rashomon is due. Someone in the other class asked me to extend it to tomorrow night, so I'm going to do that. So if you haven't watched Rashomon yet, please do so. It's the classic movie about perception. It's often considered one of the best movies ever made. Certainly, it's included in a lot of these lists that newspapers and different groups put together about, what are the best movies. Rashomon is very often included on such lists, and it's the very word, the Rashomon effect, is often used. You can look it up on Wikipedia. Is often used to describe when people have sharply differing perceptions of the same event. So that's how much the film has seeped into the public consciousness that the very title of the film is used to describe perceptual biases or disagreement about perceptions. And so it's a great film to watch, certainly a major work of art, and something that makes you think a lot. And a lot of it, he's saying that he's talking about self-serving bias, but it's also that we see things differently because of our differing assumptions and values about the world. And so somebody who never saw, I once heard a long time ago that some anthropologist showed photographs to a tribe somewhere that had never seen photographs before, and they couldn't see what it was. They couldn't see the picture. And the ability to perceive one thing or another thing is often shaped by the assumptions about the world that we make. And this is directly related to the idea of selective perception that we're going to be talking about, that we often don't see what is there. And, in the film The Fog of War, which you're going to watch later in the semester, Robert McNamara says that about the beginning of the Vietnam War, but it's true in many, many different areas, that how we perceive things will vary sharply depending on not just self-serving bias, but cultural factors, the way we shape things. So, my wife is Russian speaking, among other things. She speaks 4 languages, German and Mongolian also, and English. And she listens to the news a lot in Russian. And basically the news in Russian about the war in Ukraine is very different from the news in English. Okay. And we even see that here. If you watch different TV channels, they give completely different accounts of what's occurring that are often conflicting. They're diametrically conflicting. So if you watch MSNBC, they say one thing. If you watch Fox News, they say exact different stuff. And so it's very difficult to know what's true. And this is true in business as well. Businessmen and women are confronted with widely differing sets of impressions that can lead to differing facts, and how you organize your perceptions is going to drive what kind of facts you conclude. So basically, perception is a process by which we organize sensory impressions to give meaning to our environment. And what we perceive can be different, and often sharply different, from objective reality. Now, somebody might say, well, as a result, there is no objective reality. Like, one conclusion you could draw from Rashomon, and it would be a very Zen sort of thing, is that we're, or mystical sort of thing, is that there is no ultimate reality, that life is an illusion. And the thing is, though, that may be true philosophically. That's a debate we're not going to engage in today. But if you want to start a business, there is a reality, and the reality is, does the business fail or does it succeed? So how your perceptions need to match that reality. Whether that's ultimately reality in some philosophical sense is not really relevant, because you can say, well, there's no such thing as reality until a truck hits the person, and the person goes to the hospital. Then there is that's the reality. So there is certainly a reality. Yes, Brendan.
Hi, Professor. I'm sorry to cut you off, but is the film? I know it's a 1950s film. Is it in English, or does he have English subtitles?
My recollection, I watched it not too long ago. My recollection is that it has subtitles.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I don't know if you can find it like completely dubbed or not. If that's your interest. There isn't a version available on the Criterion Collection, which has an English dubbed version. Usually it says this is unusual in that Criterion usually are purists that do not put dubs on their discs, but they make an exception for Rashomon. So there, you can subscribe to Criterion and get the dubbed version according to this, or it may be available elsewhere because the Criterion films are widely distributed. So I don't know, but I think the one I got on Amazon is dubbed, if I'm not mistaken. So there you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So basically, we're talking about perception, and I'm saying that there is an objective reality in business. And so we want to make sure that our perceptions reflect reality. And that is really hard. I was in my 3200 class yesterday, we were talking about creativity. And one of the things I mentioned, I showed, and maybe I'll do that here too, at the expense of boring Alexander, who takes both classes, is that modern art, is highly creative. And I was talking about modern art in terms of creativity, but someone in the class said, why is that art? And, it's really, you could say, well, Jackson Pollock is an art, and if you watch that film with Ed Harris that he made about 20 years ago, Pollock, they mentioned that in a couple of times. A lot of people at the time said this is not art; it's crap. And everyone's entitled to their opinion. I'm not going to say because you don't think Jackson Pollock is legitimate, it's not art. So I mean, what is art is really a matter of perception also. Maybe you can take an art history class and get their rationale for why it's art, but in the end it's your call, and you can decide. I mean, the same thing with Bitcoin, like a lot of people think Bitcoin is the wave of the future and it's based on the blockchain and it'll always have value and it's going to be the real money and so on. And then there are a lot of smart people like this guy, Charlie Munger, who's Warren Buffett's partner and right-hand man. Munger says Bitcoin is stupid. It like has no, it's nonsense, and he won't be involved in it. Who's right? It's a matter of perception. Somebody's going to turn out to be right. I don't claim to know. If I knew, I would, I wouldn't be somebody else. But these perceptions are going to be either right or wrong, and you've got to be prepared to adjust your thinking to adjust your interpretation of what's right and wrong. So just I'll show you it's kind of interesting. I'll do a screen share, and so let's look at like the 25 most expensive paintings ever sold, and there's some really interesting stuff. Okay, so here's the 20 most, so this is okay, that was the Pollock. All right, so this is who is this? Basquiat. So he was a street artist in Manhattan who caught on. He befriended Andy Warhol. There's a great movie about him, Basquiat. It's really interesting. And so this one sold for 110 million. And this Modigliani, 118. This is Munch, 119. Klimt, that's only 5 million. That's peanuts. This de Kooning, 138 million. Pollock, 140. And basically, people look at this and they say, wait, like my 4-year-old could do this. And I don't know the answer. if you watch the movie or you study his life, you know what you learn is that he was backed by Peggy Guggenheim, who is the niece of the funder of the Guggenheim Museum, and that may have had something to do with his fame, but basically, you know, people are willing to pay 140 million. Lucian Freud, Three Studies of Lucian Freud by Francis Bacon, sold for 142 million. Another Klimt, 150 million. I guess those went on the market. This Picasso, 155 million. You see this intense creativity here. But, you know, people might say, oh, it's really, you know, why is that 157 million? I don't know the answer. This Liechtenstein, you know, 165, you know, wow, you know, it seems like any cartoonist could duplicate that fairly easily. So anyway, I mean, you know, you say art is a matter of perception, and perhaps that's true. I think it's less true if you talk about starting a business, because there's an objective force called the market, and the market will either prove you right or wrong. And basically, perception then needs to be tested, and you have to be really careful when you decide on a course of action, and be prepared to withdraw it. I mean, take a loss and withdraw if you're wrong. So basically, Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration, sweat. And so basically, you have to test your ideas, and that's a big part of it. But both sides are hard. People are often unable to make that creative leap, and that can be a block. But once you make the creative leap, then you need to test your ideas against reality and see whether they work. Now, things that shape our perception of what reality is include the object, the perceived target, and the situation. The perceiver, the perceived object, and the situation. And basically, the perceiver brings all kinds of attitudes and values, motives, biases of various kinds, and we'll talk about those. The target is in a context, and it has things like what its appearance is like, and how it compares to other things. So, for example, people who go for loans at a bank who are good looking are more likely to get the loan than people who are less good looking. So the relationship of the target, or I should say, the attributes of the target will often bias perceptions, even though there's no relevance. And as well, the context, the situation is really important. So like if something is novel, if everything's static and something else is moving, that's important. Attribution theory is our perception and judgment is based on assumptions we make about the state of mind of the person we're drawing conclusions about, and the environment. So basically, we distinguish between external, internal causes, and blame people for whether they did something wrong or not, based on the conclusion we draw about whether it's up to them or not up to them, whether they decided to do something or the situation forced them to do it. And there's, first of all, something called fundamental attribution error, which is that we tend to assume that things that occur, or people's behavior, we tend to assume that people's behavior is due to internal factors. We overestimate the effects of internal factors and underestimate the influence of external factors. So, if you work in a company, what you often find is that if something goes wrong, who's to blame? There's always somebody to blame. That's what people say. Who's to blame? If something goes wrong, it's somebody's fault. But that often is false. It could be that if something goes wrong, it's due to the situation and not any one individual. You see this a lot with presidents. The public assumes that if the stock market goes up, it's because the president is good, and if the stock market goes down, it's because the president is bad. This is true superstition. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. It's scary that this is often discussed in news as like a matter of public policy, because what the president does generally has very little to do with whether the stock market goes up or down. Most of the time, it has nothing to do. There may be times, rarely, when there's some decision made that will affect markets, but in general, and then you can attribute, you can see what the decision was and why it affected it. But the general rise and the occasional decline of the stock market is irrelevant to who's president. The thing that causes it is the policy of the Federal Reserve Bank, which largely drives the stock market. We've seen this in recent months because Jerome Powell chose to raise interest rates, I think correctly, incidentally, because of inflation. And so he's trying to reduce or bring back inflation to a level that the establishment thinks is appropriate. I disagree with that too, but that's another story. So basically, what they feel is appropriate is 2% a year. What's been is 6.5%. And you all know this. The eggs have gone up and so on. I don't have to tell you about it. So basically, to correct that, he is raising interest rates to higher levels than they've been. And that is the correct response. That's how you stop inflation. The trouble is that he hasn't raised them enough. Not that he shouldn't have raised them. So, but of course, the Wall Street crew doesn't like it because it causes the markets to go down. So the market's been assuming that he's going to chicken out, and that itself is a perception. It could be right or it could be wrong. I don't really know. But the question is, will Powell be true to his stated aim of reducing inflation so that people can afford to buy eggs again? And so the perception on Wall Street is that he's going to chicken out because a presidential election is coming up in 24, and if he keeps raising rates into the next year, so into 24, this will cause further stock market declines and will influence the presidential election. That may be true or it may be false, but it's a perception. And you can bet one way or the other way in the markets, but it's all based on perception. And so the reality will test that perception. And so the situation that the president faces is one that was inherited because of the response, the public response, backed by both parties, of increasing a lot of money in order to protect people from the effects of COVID. And when that money was handed out and created by the Federal Reserve Bank, there was a massive increase in the money supply, which in turn causes inflation. Now, when the Fed reverses that by raising interest rates, and exactly raising interest rates reduces the amount of money. It's the same thing. It's saying the same thing. They're reducing the amount of money, really, which causes interest rates to decline. So basically, as they reduce the amount of money, that's going to cause declines in business activity and rising unemployment. And public perception is that the president causes this. This was the belief when Hoover was president, that he had caused the Great Depression in the 29 crash and then the subsequent depression in the 30s. And it was also the belief that Carter had caused the recession in 80. And Trump, all of them do. Trump claimed that the market went up because of him, and so on. I think Obama claimed the same thing. And so basically all these characters want to take credit when the stock market goes up. And but what the scary part is, this is repeated on in the media, which means that the media is foolish. And so you can't take it seriously. So basically then people's conclusions about reality and their perception of what reality is often not what reality is. And so basically we bring our biases, and also the situation will affect how we think, and things like novelty and how unique the situation is, and as well the perceived object, what it's like. Like somebody's good looking will be more likely to get hired or be more likely to get a loan. All of those things are going to affect how we perceive. So I talked about fundamental attribution error, and I was saying that people overestimate the effects of internal choice, psychological choice on behavior, that a lot of the time what people do is because of the circumstances rather than because of any kind of choice. So we underestimate the influence of external factors and overestimate internal factors. Now, when it comes to ourselves, we have the reverse bias, that we tend to attribute ambiguous information as flattering, and we tend to think positive information is true, and we tend to reject negative feedback. And we all do it. So, there's nothing wrong with someone who does that. It's normal. So basically, we have this self-serving bias that we all have. Now, attribution theory is a bit more subtle, and it basically says that there are contextual reasons why we perceive behavior as caused by internal or external factors. And so fundamental attribution error, while it's undoubtedly right, is modified by some contextual things. And these include distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency. Distinctiveness means that an individual displays different behaviors in different situations. So, for example, if somebody runs away from a fire, but stands firm in an explosion will conclude that there was something about the fire that made them run away, and something about the explosion that made them stand fast, but it wasn't due to their individual cowardice that they ran away from the fire. So basically, if they behave differently in different situations, we will view cause as due to environmental or external things. Consensus is where there are more than one, there are many people, there's more than one person, and people behave differently in the same situation. So I'm sorry, in consensus, everybody behaves the same in a given situation. So everybody who faces a similar situation does the same thing, then we view the cause as external. So, everyone went back in the building on 9/11. It was because of the circumstance. It wasn't because they did something stupid. It was because they were victims. It wasn't that they did something to themselves. And finally, consistency is that if somebody behaves the same way in various situations, then we assume that it's due to internal causation. So if somebody behaves differently in different circumstances, we assume it's due to external causes. If somebody behaves the same in all circumstances, then we assume it's due to internal causes. And if everybody behaves the same in a given circumstance, then we assume that it's external causes. So basically, we tend to judge people based on these patterns, and they might be right some of the time, but they'll often be wrong, and we have to be aware of that. In particular, the search for a scapegoat when things go wrong is characteristic of what might be called a threat rigidity response, where when we feel threatened, we look for causes, and we're going to blame we're going to look for somebody to blame. We're going to scapegoat somebody, and this can often be unfair. And also there could be a rush to judgment, which can also be unfair. So we have to be very careful of that we don't let fundamental attribution error bias our decisions. Does that happen a lot? Yes. Does it happen in public discourse? Yes. Do experts make these kind of mistakes? Yes. Okay, so in other words, the world is riddled with perceptual biases, and it's very, very difficult to separate them from what is real. And so we always need to be very careful in making decisions, and we have to accept that much of the time we're going to be wrong in what we decide. Someone who claims that they know the absolute truth, anyone who disagrees with me is a fool. This kind of thinking is itself superstitious, and the claim that the human mind is capable of accurately forecasting the future, even by experts, is wrong. When I went to the UCLA business school in the late 1970s, I took a course with an economic forecaster who, would get quoted in the media quite a bit, and the UCLA economic forecast. The real economists don't take stuff like that seriously, but the media pays a lot of attention to it. So the business school was funding that, and it was getting a lot of publicity. And I took a course with him, and he said that he loved, his favorite forecasts were the ones that people wanted to know what was going to happen in 30 years. And he said the reason is that nobody would remember what he said, so that basically he could say anything and no one would care because they would remember 30 years hence that he had made this absurd prediction. But if when I never forgot that, because it's obviously true. So in other words, we know what climate's going to do in 50 years, but we can't predict the weather tomorrow accurately. When I first heard that, it really struck me. It's one of the few things I remember from this course. But on top of it, we basically have to recognize that virtually all decision making is subject to very strict limits on what we really know. And so the basic rule in human understanding is that we know little. And it's not just because of our perceptual biases, which I'll talk about in a minute. It's also because even if we could perceive reality perfectly, which we certainly can't, we still wouldn't know what the future is because it's the interaction of the variables is far too complicated. And as well, we often do not see some unexpected factor that might occur. And we don't understand unexpected fluctuations well. So this is the idea in that book, The Black Swan, that unexpected events are often going to completely blow our assumptions. Nassim Nicholas, no, that wasn't his name. What was his name? Here, this one. Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Okay, Taleb, that's the name. And basically that unforeseen events are going to radically shift our expectations. And this is going to happen all the time. Okay, so basically we can we can experiment and make assumptions and take risks, but we need to, and that's how you make money, but you need to then adjust these so that when reality shifts in some way, that we're able to shift our investment, take a loss, maybe take a, it's better to take a 10% loss than to insist that our perception is right. And what a lot of people will do is say, reality is wrong and I'm right, and continue to hold on. It may be true, and it could be that, if you hold on long enough, you'll succeed. And part of the creative process, I was telling my other class, my 3200 class, that I was just watching the movie Julie and Julia, about Julia Child, and what it depicts the parts about Julia Child. Julia Child was the woman who brought French cooking to America. That she was living in France, and she got the idea to study at the Cordon Bleu, and then she learned how to cook these great French dishes. And Americans at that time had no idea about gourmet cooking. And she went on PBS and became famous teaching Americans how to cook French cooking. And now we have the Food Channel and everything, but basically at that time, no Americans, very, very few, if tiny, not even 1%, thought about, I can make beef bourguignon at home, and she went on PBS and publicized this. But one of the things it showed about the creative process was the repeated rejections the book she was working on with her friends, that the repeated rejections they suffered before they finally succeeded. And this is always true of the creative process. And so, when you're dealing with something of great importance, then you have to weight your opinion against the market appropriately. But when you're dealing with, say, an investment idea, you have to say to yourself, am I so sure of this that I'm going to be willing to take a 50 or 60% loss and stick with it because I know in the future it'll go up? And some of the time you might say, yes, I'm positive this is going to work. Other of the time you might say, no, it's not. But you have to be aware that the market can be wrong a lot longer than you can afford to be right. And so you need to, at times, reassess your thinking and cut your losses and move on. I'm not saying it's always true. It may not always be true, but some of the time, yes. So basically, we bring to our business activities a whole host of biases that your book discusses. And some of them are when we judge others, that we're subject to really the fundamental thing that causes, I think, pretty much all perceptual bias, which is selective perception. The idea of selective perception is that we don't see everything that's before us. We only pick out the things that have meaning. Like many years ago, I don't know if it's true or not, but I remember someone saying that this anthropologist showed a photograph to some tribe somewhere, and the people in the tribe couldn't perceive what was in the photograph. They could not see it. And in other words, you had to somehow be exposed to recognizing the meaning of what's in a photograph before you could actually see it. And, the same is true, in that movie with Dustin Hoffman, The Rain Man, with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise, where Cruise plays like a sort of ne'er-do-well who finds out that his wealthy father had another son that he didn't know. He had a brother that he didn't know about. When his father dies, he learns that he had a brother, and it turns out that the brother is autistic. And the movie's it's a very interesting story, and it depicts him as being able to perceive. He doesn't function, but he's able to perceive things that other people can't perceive. And there's a lot of truth to that. There were these twins who lived in the 1920s, I think, who were able to, they could tell, if you gave them a date, they could tell you what day of the week it was. So if you said to them, June 29th, 1812, they would know what day of the week that was, but they couldn't function in other ways. And like how this comes about is not understood. But clearly we don't perceive everything in the environment. And so how we screen information is going to affect what we see as possible. And this, at the same time, if we give impressions to ourselves, that can affect how we perceive things and where we see opportunities. So basically, a lot of the great scientists, when we talk about in the other class, have had these perceptual difficulties and maybe couldn't function in some ways, but were able to see things that nobody else could see. And, the examples, Nikola Tesla, Albert Einstein, and the same is true with scientists maybe who don't suffer from such distortions, but deliberately put themselves in new contexts so that they can jar their perceptual intake and see things in a different way to enhance their creative thinking. And so basically, we can improve the kind of information that's input to us and where we see opportunities. But the difference between Bill Gates and me is that Bill Gates had access to a computer when he was in high school, and he saw this as a great opportunity. I also had access to a computer in high school, and it was around the same time, and I didn't see it as an opportunity. So basically, how he perceived it was completely different from how I perceived it. And so he was Bill Gates, and I'm me. But basically, we all perceive things in different ways, and how we perceive them is going to affect what happens to us in life. So we can change how we perceive, and so change what happens to us. Other biases, and we have this with people, of course, we have, let's say, stereotypes. That's another perceptual bias. And, somebody belongs to a group and we assume something, it could be racial or religious, the things we talked about in HR with Title VII, it could be, gender or whatever, or it could be things that are different, like, oh, you used to be in HR, so you can't do marketing, or, something like that. It could be that kind of thing. And I think we have biases in lots of different areas, and it often limits people's opportunities, but it's also often not true. At the same time, and incidentally, that's why a lot of people who are successful entrepreneurs are either immigrants or come from minority groups, because basically they've been stereotyped out of jobs in the corporate sector, like the kind of jobs that you get that are hard to get. So there are also other biases, or things like contrast effects and halo and horn effects. Like a halo effect is if you do something really good, then it might be the one thing that the manager cares about, so they give you a promotion. Like the manager likes people who are neat and clean, so they give the person a promotion. The other guy's messy but is more productive, but they don't get the promotion because the manager cares about neat and clean. And the opposite could also be true, that horn effects are like a devil's horn, that there's one thing that somebody does wrong, and even though their performance is good, the manager can't abide by that one thing, and so they exclude them from promotion. A big area where these kinds of perceptual bias, there are two big areas that I mentioned in respect to these kinds of perceptual biases. One is performance appraisals, where managers are often going to rate people based on biases that they bring to the table. And so a halo effect will come into a manager's performance appraisal of the employees in the department. Another area where this comes into play a lot is job interviews. And that's why, it's probably going to be true that machine-driven employment decisions are going to outperform human-driven decisions. It's fairly easy to show, and a guy named Frank Schmidt, who passed away a couple of years ago, did a huge amount of research in this area, that you can show that ability tests are better predictors of job performance than interviews. And most firms won't use such tests, But the simple truth is that you can enhance your productivity, enhance your profitability by using better selection methods, and the companies don't do it. And the result is that perceptual judgments that interviewers make are often inaccurate. Your book talks about using multiple interviewers, but I don't think that's much of a solution. The real solution is using validated test instruments that actually do predict performance. And one example, like if you're going to hire a chef, you own a restaurant and you're going to hire a chef, or let's say you have a company and you have a company cafeteria. I once had lunch at Goldman Sachs, and at Goldman Sachs they have individual rooms for each person eating there. So if they're walled off, so you meet privately with the person you're having lunch with, and when you want the waiter, you press a button and then they come in. And you can order anything you want. So I went there for lunch. I had sushi. You could add anything. I could have said beef bourguignon or steak or whatever. They would have brought anything. But anyway, you press a button. I played with it. I pressed the button. The guy came right in. I was like shocked. But basically, why am I talking about this? Well, basically they have these closed off rooms so that people won't hear what the other people are talking about. But basically when people interview each other, they're still going to have these biases that they bring to the table and aren't going to change how they evaluate the other person. And according to your book, I found this like really interesting. Most job interviewers decide stuff in the first second that they meet the candidate, first tenth of a second, and everything that happens thereafter isn't going to matter. And so these kinds of hasty decisions are characteristic of people in all walks of life. And it's not that anyone's at fault, it's just human nature. So basically what I'm saying is that regardless of the firm, you're generally going to do better with mechanized selection instruments. Like one of the things Schmidt wrote with another guy, someone named Hunter, and they wrote this piece where they looked at what the effect of using an ability test would be on a police department, and they found a 30% increase in productivity when they if they used a objective instrument from using a informal interview. Now, if you look at 30% increase in productivity, that would mean to most companies, for most companies, productivity is profit, I mean, is basically a few percent of sales, maybe 10%. So if you increase output by a third, that could have a huge effect on profit. In other words, it's leveraged. So that purely goes into profit. So you could quadruple profit by increasing productivity by 30%. And so the companies could have major effects by saying, you really aren't that good at selecting people. Instead, use some objective testing measures. Oh, I know what I was talking about. I just remembered what I was talking about Goldman Sachs. So let's say Goldman Sachs was to hire a chef, and basically, how would they select the chef? Would they interview the chef, or would they have the chef cook for them? Okay, obviously, if the chef cooks for them, they're going to see how good a cook the chef is, and they're going to come to a much better decision. But what most companies do, they don't have the job applicant show them the work they do. What they do is they ask the job applicant, are you good at the job? Or do we like you? You know, and then they hire the person. So the result is, you know, just as with loans, if, you know, somebody's appearance predicts their ability to get a loan with an R square of 0.6, that's like, you know, the whole question is what they look like. And if you do that with job applicants, you're going to be hiring the wrong people. And so these kinds of issues, it has a lot to do with investing. It has a lot to do with employment selection. It has a lot to do with how people are praised on the job, and many other aspects of business too, what kind of business you go into and so on. So you have to be aware of these perceptual biases. Now, one thing, you know, I just mentioned what business you go into, and basically one of the big issues in entrepreneurship is overconfidence, that entrepreneurs will tend to believe that they are able to do something, and they will keep pressing that thing even when it becomes more evident that they're not able to do it. So basically, we tend to be overconfident about our abilities, and that's why I'm talking about being careful about sunk costs. That, you know, you may make a mistake in investing, and then, you know, if the market falls a certain amount, then say to yourself, look, I'm going to cut my losses at a certain point and get out. But on the other hand, it may be that if you're positive, you'll stick to it. In the long run, you know, what Buffett and Munger advocate is, you know, if the stock falls by 50%, so what? If you're sure you've valued it correctly, it doesn't really matter because the market's insane. And that's probably true in the long run. But in the short run, it may not be true. And so, you know, a lot of the time you have to decide, will I hold on to this for a long time, or will I pull out? And this is something that you have to balance at times. So basically, there are a lot of common biases, and entrepreneurs are often overconfident. And it turns out that people who are less smart tend to be more confident of their own abilities than people who are more smart. In other words, people with weak intellectual abilities overestimate their abilities, where people with strong intellectual abilities underestimate their abilities. So, you know, we all have self-serving bias, and we all need to correct for decisions we make at times, and ask ourselves, are we in the right thing or aren't we? Performance, yes, Raquel. Go ahead.
Yeah, Professor. So you're talking about self-service and biases, but isn't it society that basically creates those? With the example that you gave about an intelligent person will probably not boost themselves as much versus another person. If you look at how even we're educated, right? It does not really leave room, because the grading system, the test that we do, there's no way to really figure out who is the smart one versus who's not. So I hope I'm not going off tangent here, but just looking at the biases that it's kind of society breeds it, the way we are structured.
Okay.
So my point is, are those biases something that can be helped, or they're just going to be with us forever?
Yeah,
like,
I think
are we able to grow apart from it because it's systematic?
Yeah, no, I think we can definitely overcome things like that. I agree with you that I think there's a lot of pressure put on people to accept their social position. Okay. But I think it's definitely, I mean, there are plenty of examples of people who have overcome their social positions. So it is possible. The thing is, it takes a lot of work and a lot of courage, and not everyone wants to take those kinds of efforts and take those kinds of risks to do it. So, for a lot of people, it's better to keep doing what they've been doing. It's safer, it's more comfortable, it's more familiar. So the question is, how do you overcome these things? And I think I've given you some tools already, specifically goal setting. And you can add to that things like envisioning your aims, figuring out what you want to target, visualizing where you're headed, and working on basic skills, learning, figuring out what you want to go into, and then deliberately learning about that area, and then building skills and finding ways to access that area. I've talked a lot about informational interviewing, and a lot of people, and I expect everyone to do a good job. I don't want to, play the game of queuing low expectations and then not getting good results, and then I'm just part of that. But basically, what I'm trying to do is cue you in that all the things I'm talking about are what you need to do what you just said. So, I mean, what I'm trying to do is teach you that. Okay. Hello? All right. So maybe the sound's not working. So anyway, we're just about out of time. That was a good question. And I've still got a lot more material to cover. So we'll start next time with some of the common biases. We'll get started with that on Wednesday, and I'm a little ahead in the other class, but that's not a big deal. And we haven't gotten to ethics yet. And so for next time, we'll continue with the lecture, and I'm going to start. I found in the discussion on your goals, was it your goals, or the discussion we had last time? It was about the Smile Factory. I started calling on people, and I found that worked a lot better than when I just talk. So I'm going to start calling on you guys. I should have said that in the other class too. I didn't do it. So make sure you're prepared for the discussion about Rashomon. Okay, watch the movie carefully. It's a very subtle film. I've seen it about 3 times. I haven't used it a lot in my teaching. I was first exposed to it at UCLA. Actually, I was just talking about when I took a sort of a OB class. It was a mix of OB and managerial skills. It was taught by a guy named Eric Flamholtz, who was one of my favorite professors there. And he used a film that was an American remake of Rashomon, which it made in a form of a Western called The Outrage. It was made in 1964. It's a half decent movie. I showed it once to my class, one of my classes at NYU years ago. It's a decent movie, but it really doesn't hold a candle to Rashomon. I don't know why. I think he figured the students weren't up to appreciating a foreign film. And I don't like that philosophy. I think, Rashomon is a 10 times better film than The Outrage. admittedly, Claire Bloom is in the Outrage. She was great, and a number of other good actors were in it. Paul Newman and I think Edward G. Robinson, if I recall. But basically, Rashomon is a true all-time great movie, and basically it's worth watching. So try to watch it carefully, be patient with it. I know, I've been reading more and more about how social media has caused people to have short attention spans. And, it's something you need to work on. If you can't, if you're not able to watch a full-length movie, let's think about improving on that. So basically, try to get that, watch that carefully. And the discussion board will be due tomorrow night. I added a day. Now, finally, if there's anybody here who came after I took attendance, please try to get here on time. It's like a big mess every time I take attendance in the beginning. There's people streaming in at the last minute and interrupting because they came late and so on. So maybe from now on, I'm gonna take attendance at the beginning, and after a certain amount of time, I'll let all the latecomers in, and then I'll mark everyone late and who came late, and and then we'll handle it that way. So see you next time. If you came late, please see me, and I will give you credit for attendance. Okay, have a good day.
Professor, where can I find the movie, the
Okay,
board, the discussion board?
I put that in the syllabus,
Oh, it is? Oh, okay.
but I can tell you right now, yes, of course, but yeah, I always put all the sources of the things on the syllabus. So let me, here, I'll show you. There may be a way to get it for free, and maybe some of your classmates can tell you, but let me look on Amazon is where I usually get stuff. The students tell me I'm crazy for paying for movies. I don't know. If there's a way to get it for free, one of your classmates maybe can tell you. Oops. Person. So Rashomon. Okay, so basically here, first one. So you can get it here for $3.99, $3.59. I don't know if there's a way to get it for free. Like you could go to YouTube. Sometimes things are on there. Rashomon full length. Let's see. I see the trailer. Oh, look, 1950 full movie. There you go. So it's right on YouTube. Oh shit. Okay, I'm not supposed to show that. Okay, so basically that's how you do it. Go right on
Okay.
YouTube.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
Hey, Professor, my mic and my connection is bad. I don't think you got me for attendance.
Say what?
I don't think you got me for attendance. My mic was not working.
Okay, try to get here on time, okay?
All
right. Anyone else?
Professor, same issue for me.
Okay, this is Marimar.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, this was Muhammad, by the way.
Afi.
Yes.
Yeah, I had. It's okay.
Thank you.
Plamacus. Is Plamacus here?
Yep, me too.
Okay. All right. Someone else, who else? Taryn? Is Taryn here? No. Okay. Anyone else want to talk to me about something? Ludley, Summer, Alexander? No? Okay, see you next time.